G'day mate, 40 here. So one thing that surprised me during the LA fires last month is how much people hate LA. I remember when I went back to Australia and I just mentioned to people that I lived in LA. A number of people express condolences. Right? They think it's some kind of hellhole there. Like, why on earth is there such passionate hatred for LA if LA isn't doing anything to harm you? And a related question, why is there so much rage in dissident politics, whether dissident politics of the right or dissident politics of the left? My God, these are days I love LA. The air is so clean and fresh, and the light is just gorgeous. In the new Netflix series Running Point, the shots of LA are just scrumptious. The light is dazzling and clear. Blue sky, sunshine. I love living in LA. Anyway, why do people have so much useless levels of rage? So rage serves you and it gives you the strength to accomplish something in the moment that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. But aside from that, rage doesn't serve you. Anger doesn't serve you. So why is there just so much anger out there? And I'm just getting off a 12-step meeting, and the speaker made the point that rage and shame are connected. And I just think that's empirically true. Right? I had out-of-control rage when I had out-of-control shame. And I still get shame attacks. It still washes over me, but it just doesn't last as long. But when I managed to internalize that at each stage of my life I was doing the best I could with the tools I had at my disposal, right, I was able to let go of the need to shame myself. When I was able to let go of the need to shame myself, I had less need to shame others and to rage at others. So I do think there's a strong relationship between rage and shame, and that when we address our shame, right, we will simultaneously remove much of the basis for our unproductive rage. Right? If we start locating the persons, the voices who instilled shame in us when we were children, right? It wasn't just something that was generically done. Right? There are specific voices. So sometimes when I talk, a wise person would say, "Whose voice is that?" Usually it'd be my father's voice. My father was excellent at instilling shame in others, because it was a way that he would try to protect himself from his own vulnerability and shame. So we're always transmitting. If you had as much shame as my father, you couldn't help but try to instill it in other people. We're either transmitting the disease, or we're transmitting God, or we're transmitting reality, or fantasy and delusion. And I'm an Alexander Technique teacher, and as a teacher, my primary mission and responsibility is to transmit the essential principles of the Alexander Technique. But my personality, my psychology, my physiology, right, all that I am, will also be transmitted in an Alexander Technique lesson. So I want to evolve as much as possible so that my Alexander Technique teaching is as pure as possible. But for example, in regular life, I sometimes experience lust. But it almost never happens when I'm teaching the Alexander Technique, because I just switch into a mode, into a professional mode where I'm teaching, I'm giving instruction, and that's not the time for indulging in my lust. And so we can switch into roles often, and that can short circuit many of our self-destructive tendencies or inappropriate tendencies. But still, we can't help but bringing all of ourselves to our work, to our synagogue participation, to our charity work. And I just finished watching Douglas is cancelled, a British TV show, and the first 2 episodes are hilarious. The last 2 episodes, not so funny, and the 3rd episode is excruciating, but jolly good show, provocative, and just so well written. I particularly like it when the daughter told her dad that she didn't want to hear about a list of countries where gays get executed because that would be racist. So Peter Navarro is unhinged. All right, he was talking about Australia's aluminum industry, how it's all controlled by China, which isn't true. He was talking about how Canada has more of a fentanyl and drug problem than the United States. Not true. He produced a paper about how the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. Again, not true. So there comes a point where each of us has a choice. Do we want to cross the John Yoo line or not? So John Yoo was an attorney, worked in the Justice Department for the Bush administration. He drafted a memo defending brutal interrogation methods, some people call it torture. And I didn't have an argument with that, but he got a position at the UC Berkeley Law School after his service in the Bush administration. And then he would proceed to publish op-eds about all sorts of topics he didn't know anything about. And so the John Yoo line is where you have made so many public statements, declarations, publications, without knowing what you're talking about, that you have apparently forever lost all credibility and it's impossible to take you seriously. And John Yoo crossed that line about 15 years ago. Neil Ferguson crossed that line about 15 years ago. And we all have that choice. Do we want to cross the John Yoo line, where we are pronouncing on all sorts of things we don't know anything about? And Peter Navarro, I believe, has a PhD in economics, right, and had some valuable contributions to make at certain points of the Trump term, but now he is so unhinged from reality and from what is true, right? He is so dramatically crossed over the John Yoo line that it's impossible to take him seriously, and he's doing the Trump administration harm because he so lacks credibility. He's a laughingstock, right? He's a fool. He comes across as just someone, a shameless liar, and does not enhance the Trump administration's credibility, particularly on an issue like tariffs that almost all experts say are a bad idea, that appear to be tremendously disruptive to the economy, that there'll be all sorts of economic growth that will not happen simply because of the uncertainty with regard to tariffs. And I don't like Trump's bullying with regard to tariffs. And I don't like the way he's going about things. It just seems like a disaster. And then employing people like Peter Navarro to get out there and try to make the case for this dubious policy with all sorts of bogus assertions is a terrible idea. All right, there's one thing when you're spinning, but there's another thing when you're just flat out saying things that are just blatantly untrue. And the more controversial a topic, right, the more you need to, buttress it with some fair dinkum facts. Talk to you blokes later.